My name is Bothwell Mazarura. I am the Chief Financial Officer at Khumba Iron Ore Limited. But the label I like to give myself first and foremost is that of a husband and a father to two beautiful daughters and a very energetic son. Today we are here to talk about a scourge in our society, and that is the scourge of gender-based violence. This is a scourge that we must all fight against. Now the problem is that it is women who have been at the forefront of this fight. And we all know that overwhelmingly it is usually men who perpetrate gender-based violence. And it is about time that we as men came to the forefront and started having conversations about gender-based violence. It is only by having the conversations that we can start to understand how we can deal with the problem. Today we are having the first of such conversations in Khumba, and hopefully it is the first of many that we will have over the year. Now my stance on gender-based violence is very simple. It is something that should not exist in our society, and we should all fight against it. Now what informs that stance? Again, very simple. As I said, I'm a father of 3 children. And what I hope and desire for is a world where my 2 little girls can go out without worrying about what to wear because somebody might attack them. They don't have to be scared to get on an Uber because the driver himself might attack them. They don't get scared to fall in love because the very person that they fall in love with might be the one who turns against them. And for my little boy, I would like him to grow up looking up to men who take responsibility, who take accountability. I want him to grow up knowing that it's okay to share your feelings. It's okay to be insecure without having to resort to physical violence to assert your authority. This is a world I would like to see. The reality, though, is we are far away from this as we speak. And this is why it's important to have these conversations. Thank you.
Sanbonani, my name is Bumelelo Ngobo, working at Khumba in the office of the CEO. I'm against GBV, and it's a fight for all of us. And I'm here today to be part of this initiative and join men in having a discussion on how to better our societies.
Hi, I'm Dion Nell. I'm an exploration geologist with Khumba, and I'm here to chat a little bit about Khumba's initiative for men taking ownership of gender-based violence. From my point of view, I believe that violence in any sort is never acceptable. And it's time for us as men to take a stance and do something about that.
Hi, good morning everybody. My name is Butch Dudgeon. I work in safety in Khumba Iron Ore, and I'm very pleased to be here to have this conversation around gender-based violence. And my stance to gender-based violence is it's totally unacceptable, and I think we have to have more conversations on how to bring this type of issue in our society to the fore, to stand up and to actually challenge the gender-based violence head-on.
Good day, my name is Mukhale Mashiapata. I am from the Center for Communication Impact, which is the host organization of the Brothers for Life campaign. My personal stance really around gender-based violence and violence in general is that we cannot keep doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for different results. It's about time that we do things differently, and that's really thinking about how as men we hold each other accountable, not looking away and not thinking that because I might not be doing it, my friend is not doing it, and is to keep having these conversations, but also end with the conversations and really take up action. So my pledge today is not in my name, not in my watch. Thank you.
My name is Bongani Nene. I am the head of health for Khumba. Very happy to be having this conversation today because gender-based violence is something that is close to my heart. So happy that we are having this conversation. All along, it's been directed at women, how should they protect themselves, places to avoid, etc. So to use the opportunity to address men is actually what we should be doing because we are the perpetrators of the violence, the rape, assaults, etc. So hoping that we can hear something fruitful today and I can personally learn and share on it.
Good morning, Khumba men.
Good morning.
That's much better. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We are here for the Khumba Men Talk done by Anglo-American. since we know we are on the 16 days of activism against women and children abuse. And we decided that let the conversation be between men, because of men are found in the center of, the scourge of gender-based violence. We are perpetrators, we are teachers, we are sustainers, we are protectors of patriarchy, we are protectors of friends who are abusers. So we thought, let's start the conversation amongst ourselves. And where is it better to have a conversation than in the kitchen? Because of manhood always defines that the kitchen is not where men are supposed to be, it's a woman's space. So I thought we can break the rules or the boys' code and bring men to the kitchen, and we start a conversation, not just in the kitchen, but we actually do the actual exercise that is done in the kitchen, which is to cook. We are quite ready for the first meal. We're going to do 3-course meal, but the ones that you guys are going to be cooking would be the starter. And in front of you, you've got a pan. You should be able to see a piece of bread. You should be able to see some onion, some salt and some pepper. You should be able to see some baby spinach. And you should be able to see an ox liver. And ox liver would be your starter. And the reason I chose ox liver, I had an opportunity of growing up both in a village and in a township. And we have a saying that says, and which is usually said, I think somebody said it's courage. It's more of emphasizing courage. That as a man, you must have courage, you've got strength. So you must always, whatever task you're about to take, you must show strength, you must show resilience. So when we say it literally means that when you loosely translate it. And also, besides what is said in a township, in many cultures, a liver is eaten by men. Am I right? So if you slaughter a cow or slaughter a lamb or goat, they can take everything else, but the liver must remain for the men who are doing the exercise of killing that particular animal. And you'll be told women don't eat this. So my reason for choosing this is only those two bases. One is a symbol and a slogan that many of us use in our different circles where we socialize, when we encourage whether it's positive or negative masculinity. So I thought if we use the liver, we would better understand the things that we say to each other, whether in the corporate space, whether at home, whether with friends, whether we're watching soccer or cricket or rugby. When we talk about strength, we talk about manhood, we always emphasize power, dominance. And I thought this is a symbol for me. So that's why you're going to have your first meal, which is a starter, being an ox liver fried on onion and will be laid on a bread roll. And you are going to use the spinach as your garnish. So I think we can get started. Let's switch on our stoves. Once we have our stoves, I'll explain the process and leave it to you.
How did they work?
There's a piece of onion. Yeah. I would ask us to quickly chop it. You decide whether you want it fine or you want it rough. So in less than 3 minutes, you should be done.
Is it chopped into cubes or
How much?
Do we chop all of
You
it?
decide.
Is this where grown men
How
cry?
many of us have got kids here? Or grandkids? I saw some white beards as well. So it might happen that there are those who also have got grandkids.
White beard is
I've
pearls
got
of
kids.
wisdom.
You've got kids.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyone else? Quick show of hands. Kids. Or kid? Boy, girl?
Boys,
Boys.
Two girls and a boy.
And girls.
I have one that I know of. It's a girl, she's 6. The reason I'm asking is because of many a times when we talk about our behavior, we never bring it home. How many of us wish that our daughters can find a good and decent man when they grow up?
Yeah, definitely. That's important.
Yeah.
And if one was to ask, if your daughter met a man who's 100% like you,
Yes.
as far as behavior is concerned, would you be proud of that?
You'd be a lucky girl.
Anyone else?
No, I think that's probably the sum total of what my daughter is looking out for. That's me, in totality. Nothing more, nothing less.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else who's got a daughter?
I don't have a daughter yet, but I would like to think that I'm the type of person that she would like, to have as husband one day.
Sir, you have a son?
I have two sons, and I think what's important is I think that my sons must be able to treat the daughters or the girlfriends they bring home like I treat my wife. Hopefully there's going to be some learnings from that as well, to be treated with respect and kindness. And hopefully those are the type of values that I bring into my son, because that's where they're going to learn from, I think.
The reason I'm actually asking this, I'll get to the main question that we saw. If your oil is good, put your pan on the stove. So I was saying that the reason I actually started with that question is because of many times when we talk about gender-based violence and we talk about masculinity, toxic masculinity or patriarchy, we're always outlooking. No one actually starts to look at their own behavior and how they're influencing their own space. How you behave towards your partner, how you behave towards your kids, what your kids are learning from you. Whatever they're learning at home, it's something that they're going to take out when they socialize with their friends, whether it's school or in the streets, But the most important question for me is, as men, are we accountable to each other? Do we hold each other accountable? Those who are Christians will say, I am my brother's keeper. What does it entail being your brother's keeper? Do you hold your friends, your male friends, and your siblings who are males, your family members, accountable? As colleagues, do we hold each other accountable as far as our behavior is concerned?
I think for me that's where the problem starts. I think generally we like to be accountable in our own homes, in our own spaces, but when it comes to encroaching onto other people's spaces, even if it's your friends, it's their own family, and generally we don't overstep those boundaries. And it's generally, I think, that's lacking, amongst us as men, is holding each other accountable.
And why do we do that? Well, maybe let's give another person a chance to talk about that. Why about accountability? Are we accountable to each other? Do we hold our friends, our families accountable? Temba?
I think one of the challenges is that if you can hold somebody accountable, do you have the strength and the courage to go through the conversation for some of the fallout that might come? If you're actually going to challenge somebody and hold somebody accountable, and do you actually want to have that in your life? So are you man enough to actually confront it and actually go through with it?
Somebody else?
I think if you start the conversation, you have to carry it through. It doesn't help just raising it and then just leaving it. You need to carry through that conversation. And as Butch said, you need to have that courage to actually realize that it might not be an easy discussion. In actual fact, it probably won't be an easy discussion.
Another taker?
Yeah, I think it comes at a price. If you want real change, there's some sacrifice you're going to have to make, and be real enough to know that there are consequences. You might lose friends along the way, and if that's the price you're going to have to pay, I believe that's probably going to be it. For if it is the right thing to be done, that should really be the reason why we do it, because we want to do the right thing all the time, not sometimes. But if it's about from time to time, then we're going to come back to the same problem. Yeah?
I think it might also be easier if it's your own family member that's been exposed to some gender-based violence, or somebody, it's your sister, your cousin or something. It's easier then to confront it. However, it's not within the immediate context of your own family life as well. It's more difficult to have that conversation and to have that confrontation.
On just that note, so are we confronting it because of a family member is a victim, or are we confronting it because of a family member is a perpetrator? When do we find it comfortable amongst ourselves to act? When it's my daughter that has just been violated physically or sexually abused, or when my son has actually committed the act? Which one is easier?
I suppose
You can put your liver in.
I suppose it's easier to deal with it when it's closer to home, and it's not really causing an issue in terms of how people view you. And I think that's one of the big issues in society, dealing with these issues. So if I do speak out, what is the community going to think of me? What is the community going to say about me? I think more so when incidents happen in families, you try to, hide it as much as you can from the rest of the world, because you're trying to protect that very image.
I think in a sense it might, I grew up in a very close family, we're a very tight-knit family. And in a sense it might actually be more difficult in a family situation, because you might need to break bonds that's taken a lifetime to create, if it is really that serious. And I'm talking specifically if one of my brothers or someone in my immediate family is a perpetrator. But standing back and doing nothing is actually just making it worse, and might make him just perpetuate that behavior.
I think for me that there might also be an issue around how in control you are of the situation. I think the closer it is to home, say if it's my son, I feel like I can control the situation and I need to deal with it the way I need to deal with it. Yeah. If it's someone else, I start worrying about, if I just have this conversation, I'm not in control of the situation, what might happen to the victim because of the conversation that I've just had. I can't control the situation, and therefore sometimes it makes me back away from doing anything because I'm not in control of the total situation.
Another taker?
For me, it's always easier to talk to somebody that you know, because you can anticipate the reaction and you can then decide how you're going to handle it based on that. If you approach somebody that you don't know and it turns violent, then would you be prepared for that violence? So if it is closer to home, then yes, you would be prepared for that violence regardless. But always easier, I think, to approach somebody that you know, and you can therefore manage the conversation.
I think what's also difficult is, how do you approach the subject? I think it's a matter of how do you actually going to start the conversation? What guidance is there for us? Because, sometimes if you start a conversation, it could actually turn violent as well, depending on if it's a perpetrator you're actually speaking to as well, and how are you going to deal with it? So it's a matter of, you want to do something, but how should you actually start the conversation and actually try and prevent something like this? If I don't feel confident or comfortable that it's going to come out in a positive or in a nice manner, then you might shy away from actually having the conversation.
Yeah. I think also the truth of the matter is, in our different spaces and corners, this is something that we don't wish it could happen to us. That's the first thing. So and sometimes because it has not happened to us or closer to home, we think it's that simple. So we also have to acknowledge the fact that because it's a difficult subject, it's a difficult thing to happen. It's not that easy, which then also talks to issues of how families or friends just look away because, you know, you go through different phases psychologically. First, denial. Why has this happened to me? I mean, it shouldn't have happened to me. And then you move on to thinking that, no, maybe something is really wrong here. It's not this person. It can't be, and all of that. And, you know, by the time you know it, it's been happening for many years, and you're just shell-shocked, and you become crippled. So creating an environment, you know, beforehand for things to really just come out, I think for me is really a starting point. You know, it should not be just about violence. It should be about everything in the house, in the family, the finances, the ailments that are there, etc. And so I think for me, that's sort of a stepping stone type of approach, you know, would be able to equip us to some extent to dealing with it.
Yeah.
Right? So the way in which we relate with our daughters, I suppose it might probably be easier for them to open up to us almost immediately, you know, and then you know, take action, even for the sons or everyone in the family for that matter. Yeah?
Yeah.
So if you're compatible with your liver, you can choose whether it's chutney or the hot sauce, or both. You can combine. The nice thing about food is that it's about the taste. Everyone knows bread, but how do you make your bread? Everyone knows the liver, but how do you make the liver, you know? And the taste, you can't know it, or it's not something you would know until you try it. So you can mix your hot sauce and your chutney and see what it gives you. Or you can use the chutney if you're not a hot person, or hot flavored person.
If you're not a hot person, I personally am hot. I think I'd be just hanging, you know, latching on to what you said around waiting until something has happened to have the conversation. I think we as men, we must learn to have these conversations as general conversations as opposed to waiting until something has happened. That's when it becomes more difficult to broach the topic because you've never had that intimate conversation before with your friends. We tend to like to talk about pointless things like football and cars when we're together, and we don't attack some of these serious conversations.
I think as you have said, the question, how do we start the conversation? And I think you have assisted to say, we don't have to wait for a situation to happen for us to address an issue, you know? We don't have to wait for 16 days of activism for us to have this kind of a conversation. You can take your plate, we move to the table to extend our conversation. And thank you very much, guys. I think you did an outstanding job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chef.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, we're back here again, and it's really wonderful to have all of you around the table, despite the fact that what we really are about to converse here is really not such a, you know, nice subject, but it has to be dealt with, and I think this is the first step in the right direction, you know, where we have to really start this conversations around how, you know, we begin to do something different for different results around ending and or preventing gender-based violence. And just as a background, I think, you know, probably to think about violence, you know, in its holistic way, because the statistics are staggering. I mean, we know what the statistics are, and I probably even suspect that half of the things that are reported statistically are not everything that's really the real picture of this scourge. We'll talk about the language later, you know, because it's also very important as a starting point to really just think about what is the size of the what is the size of the problem. So welcome, and the way in which we will talk about this is really just each and every one of us putting their own bit on the table. And I'm going to start by asking for your own personal stories, just briefly what your personal experiences have been, and I'll tell you why it is important to really start there. So, feel free to share any of your personal stories within the context of violence, gender-based violence, or any other form of violence. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's an important conversation to have. And we had a webinar the other day, and I spoke about a couple of personal experiences. But when it started, and Virginia was facilitating it, I said to Virginia, the sad bit about it is, when I started thinking through my life and my experiences with gender-based violence, the sad bit is I could think of so many examples, which just goes to show how prevalent it is. I could think about examples in my own family when my sister went through it when I was still a young boy. That was my first experience towards it. I could think about a time when I was in my early 20s when, one of the people that I used to hang out with was a perpetrator himself, and I found out about it. And then all into my work life, there were one or two instances I had to deal with at work as well. So for me, it was just a stark reality of the society we live in, that through my life I can find so many examples, and I'm not even naming all of them. So it's just how prevalent it is, and it is something we need to deal with. And I think these conversations are a very, very good starting point in terms of how we can start to change this.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's quite, when Bothwell also just talks about how, prevalent it is in our societies. I mean, I haven't really experienced it much, call it in the close circle of family, but I've seen it a lot with friends, and it's so unfortunate how, with a lot of them, it didn't end with their family experience, but they're now having to deal with that very same learning that they sort of picked up, and I think that really contributes to it being so prevalent, because so many people are so exposed to it, and it almost becomes a norm for many to say, well, I grew up like this, so, and to really get the guys to come out of that mindset it's quite a thing, and yeah, it's definitely a conversation to have, to be able to also break that cycle of learning and teach a different side, to say, just because we've experienced it before doesn't mean, we need to also be imposing it to the next generation and the next generation.
It is a topic that needs to be discussed, but I think it's a very difficult topic. I think in the sense that a lot of us have grown up that to talk about other people's families and to talk about that's not within your own control, it's taboo. You don't interfere, don't get involved if there's a particular family problems or something like that. My son came home the other day and he said to me, but Mom, I see Auntie so-and-so has got a black eye. And she said she slipped and fell in that as well. But you know that these things happen quite frequently, on a regular basis. But how do you actually confront this? How do you actually try and come to the fore to have a conversation around this? What is this all about in that as well? Or do we just huddle back and say, look, I don't want to get involved in that as well? So we must have a platform that's safe for us to try and just break that cycle and explain this is not the norm. We need to change it. And these type of topics are not taboo, and we need to have a bit of a discussion with our kids and our families to say this is not the right behavior that's expected within society.
I remember I grew up in mining towns, small mining towns, all over South Africa, and we always heard about these things, and like Butch said, someone bitches up at school or at work and a black eye, or and but it was never really, it wasn't real, because it's someone else's family. And I was in varsity already, and a very close family member actually went through gender-based violence, where she was abused by, at that stage, a boyfriend or fiance, and we never knew about it. And we went for a braai, and I just picked up she wasn't herself, and we're very, very close to this day. And she actually opened up to me and started talking about it. And that experience of, it's always someone else, and suddenly it's someone that you care about, someone that's very, very close to you. And actually, and during the discussions and so on, she tried to commit suicide because of that emotional trauma that she had to go through. And this is not something that happened on one or two occasions. This was over a period of time. And I still get quite shook up on this if I talk about it, because what she had to go through, unfortunately, she was able to get out of that cycle, and she's very happily married and so on now. But that discussion and the emotion that she had to go through is just absolutely, it's terrifying.
I think for me, look, we're focusing on gender-based violence, but is the issue violence in general or gender-based? So I grew up at Davidson. The way that you solve problems is through violence, and we revered the guys that were feared or that were whatever, and you wanted to know that guy, and it was cool. I mean, we still do it today. If you see a good rugby hit, ooh, and everybody cheers. American football, soccer, whatever. So I think for us, we are violent. We have been taught the way to solve problems is through violence. And that's just how it is. Now, we also don't know how to deal with emotions. And for that, then, and a lot of the things that, and there's lots of stories where whether it's a guy or whether it's a woman, as long as they've angered you, as long as they've whatever, then you are going to act violently towards that person. And for me, I think that is the critical issue. And we may be talking about the gender-based, and it is wrong, and it shouldn't happen, etc., but the holistic solution, I think, is dealing with violence and how we glorify or make it cool, that violence.
So just to take it from the point that you're making around violence in general, and I'll get back to the personal stories, is, I hear you say that if this table, for instance, hypothetically speaking, was violence, and all the utensils that are on top of the table were different forms of violence, is you're saying if we remove the table, we would inadvertently remove all forms of violence. And so I think it is also very important to think and start looking at it that way, because we probably have been looking at it just in a narrow way, which is why we are still where we are now. And tying back to the points that you made is, so if you think about all the personal experiences that you have shared, and if each and every one of us were representing 5 million men in South Africa, and we afforded those men an opportunity to share their own stories about this, how powerful and how much that would change the way in which they look at things. Because for a very long time, we have been talking about men and not with them and not to them. It's always been, you are bad, you are the rapist, you are the murderer. And I think I'm also hearing that it's important to also think about an empathetic approach to it if we really want better results. I think during the webinar, I shared a clip called Staring, and it links with what you were saying. I mean, lexicon in Davidson, staring is like this guy that everyone looks up to, right? Yes. So these are 5 to 18-year-olds who are talking about an experience from their household. This boy is explaining to his friend that he's got a staring at home. And he explains what this staring is doing. This staring, uppercut. This staring comes back home, breaks doors down, But the powerful thing around that is not only is he narrating what he has seen at home, he's also acting it out on the friend. And that's really where, you know, this whole thing is starting, is starting from. So, you know, so just in terms of the personal stories, I think for a very long time we've left them out. And, you know, we then, you know, perpetuate the same hostility that is violent in itself. Now, the other point which I think I would like, you know, you to contribute to is the whole point around what does an enabling environment look like or feel like for men to do the right thing or people to do the right thing in general. The world over, we can even go granular. So what does an enabling environment in your family, you know, look like for you to be able to think that you can tackle issues around violence, seeing that we are mainly focused on violence and in particular gender-based violence?
Yeah, it's a good question. And for me, it's got to be an open environment where people are free to discuss issues like this openly. And if we can create that, whether it's in our families, in our workspaces, wherever, in our churches, where people can really talk about the real issues, then I think we begin to start tackling the issues. I think one of the things in my experience where what I've seen and where I've experienced gender-based violence, and I'll tell you the story. It was, we had a friend of ours, and my wife was now, she was my girlfriend. We took her out to a nightclub. It was the three of us. And she was dating a guy at the time. So we went for dinner, we went to a nightclub afterwards. And then the guy she was dating heard from someone that, you know, your girlfriend was seen in a nightclub with this guy and this other girl, which is me and my girlfriend. And the guy was at home, got furious, got in his car, came to the nightclub. He came in, and then he said, and then they went outside to talk. We didn't think anything of it. But then the girl came back with a cut lip, a black eye, and she was crying. And all she was saying is she wants to go home, right? And as it happened, the guy was furious because she had gone out without him. The guy didn't know who I was, so she thought I was dating his girlfriend. And for me, two things stand out for me then. The first one was, you know, our friend had been hurt, and how she looked at me to almost say, you know, help me here. And for me, that I interpreted that help to be, you know, take me out, take me away, I want to go home, and that's what we did. But part of me then says, was she not also asking me to have a word with the guy? To say, should I have gone? Should I have gone and spoken to the guy? Should I have said something? What should I have done? But in the moment, I thought the safest thing to do was to take her away from that environment. And for me, that was the first time I then thought, you know, it's important to stand up to this. If we continue to sort of, it happens, we ignore it, we just make sure the person is okay, and if she's okay, then that's it. You forget about that incident. But you don't confront the real issue, the cause, what is really happening here, the perpetrator. And that for me is, you know, how do we begin to do that? How do we create the spaces where we can, as a society, and maybe it may not have been a good idea for me as an individual to confront him, but as a society, I wasn't the only one who was there. There were lots of people in that car park. There were lots of people in that club. There were security guards in the car park. How do we, as a society, begin to stand up can confront this whole thing. And for me, that's, I don't have the answers. It's things we need to start thinking about and talking about.
I think, and something just occurred to me. So I was involved in a similar situation. It wasn't someone that I specifically knew. We were in a nightclub of sorts, and a guy hit his girlfriend, and obviously everyone up in arms, and the guy was taken outside, and he was actually beaten up. Now, at the moment, you always feel like, well, you know what, he deserves it. You don't. But thinking back now, and is that really the right reaction? Because you're actually perpetuating it. It's just more violence upon violence. And it's not going to make him stop. In actual fact, in all probability, went home and took out the fact that he was humiliated, he was beaten up, and probably took it out on someone else. Yeah. So as much as we have to stand up and take ownership and really do something about it, violence is not the way, because you're just perpetuating this whole cycle.
I think it's very true to when we started the conversation about in the past that it's a manly thing to do. We the men must take the lead. We're the head of the household in that as well. And I think that's why a lot of the men get away with it, because it's seen as being as my right as a man, that this is the way I should behave. And I think that's where society has to come back and to reset the norm, to say what is the normal behavior accepted of a man when it comes to gender-based violence, and what will we as society accept? Because as I said earlier on, we just stick into our own little areas of influence and that as well, and we hide behind that. Oh, it's not happening with us, don't worry. But if society stands up and sticks to that norm, to say, as a man, to behave as a man towards a woman or towards a child and towards violence, this is what we're expecting. Violence is not the answer. However, we should stand together and then have this open platform, Bothwell, you're quite right, to make it easier for us to have those conversations, because sometimes I might be afraid to confront you if you were the perpetrator. That if I confront you to say, but just hang on a sec, what you're doing is not right, to say, but who are you? And I might end up in fight and more violence in that as well. So society's got to play a bigger role so we could make sure that everybody speaks and understands that violence is not acceptable, with a bit more consequences. I know it's a far-reaching request in that where we're going, but we've got to start somewhere.
I think it goes into, I suppose, also normalizing the conversations, because a lot of times again, we're going back to the whole thing, thinking it's taboo. So we don't talk about it, and then we don't deal with it, when we were still cooking there, I was just thinking to myself with my 7-year-old, when is the appropriate time to start having that conversation? Surely it's not when he gets into his first fight in high school, but it's now where I start preparing him for it. And, not just in words, but also in conduct in the house. What is he getting to see? And then he's growing up with an ability to also correct that within his own society,
I think it's important, and Bongani, you said it very, very, very well earlier, is that we still idolize people that's violent, that's more physical. And maybe that's a starting point, is to actually start idolizing people that reflect values. Not necessarily the guy that beats up everyone on the school ground. And that needs to start right from the beginning, right from school already. And I know it's something that's not going to change easily. But I think that's almost a point where you need to start understanding that being the violent guy, being the big guy in school, you might be physically big, but you don't need to force down that your will on other people.
Well, for me, I subscribe to a lot of opinions on how. And the one is, I agree with you, normalize the conversations, but positive conversations. The will not work, has not worked. Don't do this. We have a tendency to do what we are not. Don't touch, we touch. Don't whatever. And we are not dealing with the root cause of why and how I should deal with my anger. We are just saying don't hit. That won't work. So normalize the conversations and let's deal with how do you then deal with your anger, deal with whatever. But if I can be slightly controversial, and this is a general concept, there are certain people that if I'm not going through it, then I don't know what it's like. So I hear what you're saying about that guy and violence is not the way and it whatever, but after talking and talking and talking, surely there should be consequences, whether it's jail, whether it's getting beat up so you learn what it's like and feel that humiliation and feel that whatever. I know it's not ideal, but there are certain situations where there must be consequences. And what those consequences are, then we can talk about what is right and what is wrong, etc.
Yeah, well, that's probably far ahead, you know, and as you can imagine, I'm taking baby steps because it's very important to crack it and crack it right.
Yeah.
And I hear what we are saying, which is very important, and that's a takeaway, that it's only half a song without the choreography. So obviously for a very long time we can sit here and talk, but if the talk is not accompanied by action, you know, then it's not going to work. And I think that's a really important part of the puzzle. And then the second one is that, you know, for a very long time, we're thinking about and our feelings or reaction to violence from what we are hearing at the statistics. The reality is that, have we ever thought of so many other people who are just about to be violent and are not necessarily in those places where we often relegate the violence to be in? How many men are there at your workplace? I want an exact number or an estimate.
Probably 7,000 or 8,000.
7,000 or 8,000 men. You see them at work suits all the time. You have no idea what's going through their minds. You have no idea what's going through their families. You have no idea what's going through their communities. So in other words, it would seem that this new thinking, which would probably give us better results, has to move away from just an individual man. If we start thinking about this from a whole society approach, you know, and not just one man. So if we look up to one man, you know, what are the chances of sustaining any behavior change? The reality is nil. But because you pointed it out yourself that you know, if the reality is these young people are idolizing the wrong men. So you have to deliberately have an equal number of positive role models against negative role models. So if you've got one positive role model and 1,000 wrong models, the results are definitely going to be different. So we'll keep coming back here, and maybe perhaps just to move the dial, you know, forward again. And this is something that I'd like us to think about, and that is, so the whole thing around violence is that whether you've experienced it personally or not, or you've meted it out or not, is just hearing about it is violent in its own. It lives, so that's the whole thing around consequences. You know, what do you do with it? And we had a conversation when we were cooking, you know, if it were to happen to you, your close family, and what would you do? So we talked about a couple of takeaways, and those are very important in terms of what should be happening on the ground. So the other one, I think, is really to recognize that this conversation have to take place everywhere, all the time, in order for them to land on a solid foundation for some semblance of behavior change. So a minute we start thinking that around the braai stand, there's only these types of conversations that must take place, then we are sitting on a problem. And to recognize that there are all kinds of limitations, structural, physical, and otherwise, and that we've got to try and make sure that the conversations are fused into what is working and what is already there. Half the time, I think, it's thinking, when we're doing things different, we end up trying new things all the time and dropping things that are working. There's value in going back and recognizing the fact that as a country, we are violent in nature, and that's why we are where we are. And as such, I'd like to pick your brains around how you probably see it happen, within the workplace. How would you then, so to speak, throw away the box and make sure that it is really a song that is accompanied by choreography?
I think the question that you're asking is what should we do more to actually open up this discussion and this dialogue on it as well. And I think the starting point is that I think where Khumba has hosted a couple of webinars and things like that, to actually have the conversation, to ask those difficult questions, and to start the conversation around what is gender-based violence, what can we do about it, and what is it there that we can actually do. And I don't think we've had that platform in the past. So let's create that platform, and it should be maybe a bit more frequent, and not just on World Wilderness Day and that as well, so that we can, so these topics of discussion aren't taboo anymore. It's a natural part of how we progress and make things better within our own work environment, so that our own people can actually have those discussions. And maybe in these informal discussions that we actually have, you might be picking up snippets of where there are actually problems, where we can actually intervene and actually assist.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right, Butch. And I've been thinking, how do we make this a part of everyday conversation? And I think this sort of platform as a start to kickstart the conversation, I think works very well. But ultimately, we've got to make it part of the normal day-to-day conversation. Just like we live and breathe the safety culture. This is something that needs to become part of our DNA, that we are able to have these open and frank conversations and hold each other accountable around the issue of gender-based violence. So I think for me the challenge would be, how do we, from here, how do we then take those conversations further? Because you're right, it can't end here. It can't end with the 16 days of activism. It's got to be something that we live and breathe as our culture going forward.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, for all the safety things that you are, I dare say, pedantic about at work, everyone knows the consequences, and they almost adopt them without thinking twice. So you can just imagine if you fused this into that, the sort of results you get out of that, because then that's really the beginning of this new behavior change that we want. And because it's not just one individual, it's a couple of individuals. And I think there's something that's really come out of COVID, is if seeing your mate not wearing a mask, like, where's the mask? But at first it wasn't like that. It was like, it's my own business and all of that. So we've also got to recognize that one-day events do not change behavior. It has to be an elaborate, sustainable process, for the better outcomes that we'd like to have. I want to share, some of the things that we're doing as Brothers for Life and that we've been able to do in the past 10 years to try and, get to some semblance of behavior change. When it all started, it started with a manifesto where we were saying that there's a new man in South Africa, a man who knows when to say know when he's had one too many, a man who knows, that no is no, a man who does not, look at young girls as potential sexual licenses, etc., etc. And over a period of time, we were really looking out for that man. So I'm going back to some of the things that you can practically do at work. And so we had, men coming forward and reciting the manifesto and saying that, I want to be that new man, As we went along, it was almost as if we were saying the campaign is for good men, and it's ostracizing bad men. I'm going back to issues around consequences as well. That for as long as there's one man out of the 59 million doing it, all of us are tainted. So how do we then turn that around? And I think it's really thinking about how you have champions, people who then begin to live this sort of behavior that you want to see. And you support those men. And the way of achieving that is how we started the conversation. What is your personal story? Whether it has affected you, close kids, and what the fact of the matter is, as I've already said, you're tainted as a man already, then it means there's something that you've got to do. So having those champions is very important, because then there's someone to look up to. Then it also touches on the enabling environment. Once I know that I've got a champion, I do not have to wait for you and formal processes. I know there's always someone that I can talk to. So the campaign moved a little bit from there's a new man, because then the man can also be elusive, this man that we are looking for, to actually, I want to be that man. And not just looking at, because the temptation is to talk about you and what you are doing, whereas my baggage, I'm keeping it behind, and I think nobody knows about that. And I think moving further to saying that I want to be that man, and to close the loop around this particular man that we are looking for within the context of ending violence, is we have to start thinking about a 5-year-old and connect what this man that I am and I want to be with something through the eyes of a 5-year-old that today I see a man that I would like to be. Once there's that connection, we are now wielding a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it cuts through ensuring that we are the men that other men can look up to, and therefore go a step towards preventing further forms of violence, including gender-based violence, children abuse, etc. But also men-on-men violence, because remember we're talking about violence. So that's the one side of the sword. The other side of the sword is cutting from the point of view of completely ending, because here we can look through the eyes of a 5-year-old. That today I am looking at the man that I would like to be when I grow up. That distilled in this big pot of trying to find different ways and new thinking is very important. So as a workplace, there has to be a deliberate connection between what we do within the fence and what happens outside the fence, in order to sustain this sort of behavior. So how you have seen us try to do this is really just to try and think of innovative ways of exploiting every opportunity of having a conversation. And tense as it was, I mean, the food I see done with the both and all of that, is to also know that there's a potential of paralysis constantly around the issue of violence that we can actually just look away. Finding a different way of talking about it and addressing it is very critical to unlock people's potential to taking part. The last thing that I think I would like us to do is to between the six of us, make a commitment to hold each other accountable and to also just make sure, and I know that this is where sometimes, it slips through the fingers. So once you are this type of a man that a 5-year-old look up to, it's an enormous task of changing society. So don't be too hard on yourself. Language counts. Half the time, people who are donning the T-shirt of Brothers for Life are the ones who are actually the ones behind. Those of us who are in the forefront. So it's to constantly be aware, and it takes a different setting to talk about this. Victims of violence, it's found to be very disempowering and holding back and all of that. But I think the expectation is to really take one step at a time, accompanied with action, and real warm bodies who will take the process forward. So I think as you share what some of the things that you are doing, I mean, we have a completely overhauling approach that starts from the top. I've used the hypothesis of music, that it's only half a song without the choreography. And in music, there's that part of, you rehearse over and over, and then you have to take it from the top until you have really prepared a really good song that can top the charts. So I think we can share perhaps some of the things that are there on the table, and then talk about the next steps in terms of how we then fuse the next steps.
No, I think before we get into what Khumba is doing, I think for me that you touched on that point, that it can seem overwhelming because we know it is such a big problem. It is a problem in all our societies, and I think you can see people around the table come from different backgrounds and different societies. It is a common problem, so it can feel overwhelming. And then comes the issues of boundaries as well, where you can feel that you are not the one to step over your own boundary, whether it's outside of your family. And even we have grappled with whether we should step out of the mind gate and get into communities and into people's family lives. So it can feel overwhelming. But I think for me, a start is good. Starts with a conversation among 6 men. It turns into a webinar. It turns into other conversations across our business. And that's how we grow it. Just like we deal with safety, just like we did with COVID, our approach was around caring not only for our employees and contractors, but also for the communities, because we realize we don't live in an island. And I think that's the approach we must take. But it is a fight we must start to tackle. It can't overwhelm us into this paralysis that you're talking about. We've all got to start to tackle it. Maybe then, Bongani, you can start talking about some of the things we are doing.
So just expanding a little bit, just a different take. And I'm going to try and combine it, and then I'll go to what we are doing. But do we know what good is supposed to look like, and have we built that standard of? So I'm talking about where you've grown up, socialized your whole life that, hey baby, come here, it's normal. What does good look like? And where you solve problems with violence, what does good look like? Because I've just shared this video now where violence seems to be the way of solving problems. But have we sat and said, this is how you then approach a situation that is this, and this is what we consider good at Khumba, and we standardize it. So for example, what we're doing now is sharing on what is domestic violence, what is gender-based violence, what is bullying, what is harassment. And for me, some of the things, and as we start talking about it, we share at some of our Friday safety meetings, where we actually say, and people come out and say, look, we thought it was fine when you do this. If I reach and I touch you on your shoulder, or if I touch you at this thing, it's normal. If you pass pre-taxi rank, maybe hit on the bounce. That's what we grew up normal. But now that you are educating them and you are telling them that actually it's not right, and when the woman feels uncomfortable, then we've created a picture of what good is. So I think we need to go forward with creating what, I don't want to call it the ideal man, but what is our standard that says this is what we consider good, and then have conversations around that. And in that way, then people realize that the dog, what is it, wolf whistles, are actually not right, that we grew up with, and that to treat people with respect and whatever. And what does that respect mean? On the other parts, so we've had these campaigns, we call it WOW, World of Wellness, where it's basically about mind, body, and soul. So the mental health support from a preventative perspective, how do you deal with stress, with anger, with substance abuse, with whatever, but also from a supportive perspective. If I am in a situation where I'm depressed, I'm stressed, I've gone through domestic violence, then we've got K-Ways and FAMSA that then provide that mental health support. From the body and from the spirit as well, so those are the things that we have had at Khumba. I think others can share.
Just on that, I think, Bongani, I think it's also a thing where we as men have to stand up and say, you know what, it's all right if we have a problem, that we can go to FAMSA or Careways and that as well, because it's deemed as being, you're weak if you've actually got a problem or something like that as well, and if you do have anger management issues that could tend to violence and things like that as well. It's all right. You don't have to feel you've got to hide away that you can't tell people about this. And I think we've got to break that stigma as well to say that, no, we're all human beings, and at times we need the different help and assistance to deal with the different situations as well. I think if we could do that as well, and that's an accepted norm, that we can go and have these chats with people as well, I think it'd be better for us as well in the long run. So as men, I think, as a man, I think if I feel the need that I need to have somebody to talk to and things like that, I mustn't feel threatened that I'm going to be considered weak. I think I'd be a stronger person by admitting to my faults than to go to Careways or something to go and get the help that's actually needed. I think we need to have those conversations.
But you mentioned it during a short break. We need to create an environment where people, look up to men that actually has the courage to say, I need help. And that's when we need to get to.
They need to be our heroes so we can learn from them.
So there's actually strength in identifying and dealing with your weakness.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because the reality is that in each and every one of us sitting here, there's a constant streak of meting out any form of violence against our children, against our partners, starts with just road rage, or any other kind. So if we consider ourselves the first men to stop, let it be, in the hands of any type of situation that we may find ourselves in, I think the pledge should be, I want to be the first man to stop, should I find myself wanting to take it out on my partner, on my children, and then the snowball out of it. And not to think that it's not a hopeless case. Through the campaign we've worked with men. I wanted to bring out a man here who was a jealous lover and actually had murdered his partner. And he's turned around and he's got a lot to share. And that ties in with the part where we were talking around many men who are not in the papers, who are not in jail, who are not in police stations, who have actually never lifted a hand, but are living with the burden of constantly finding themselves close to doing it. There is help out there. And I think we need to be very clear and deliberate about that if ever you found yourself in a situation where you might want to take out your frustration on your partner, know that there's help. So that's very important, because half the time we are addressing the man who's already done it. You know, we're saying, you know, don't do it, like you were saying. You know, so those baby steps are very important, and they culminate into a connection, like you were saying, Doc, you know, the wow, the what, those are important touch points that at the end of the day, all of them have to be connected. Once they are connected, we should not be hard on ourselves. It's not an overnight thing. We have to be deliberate, elaborate, and constantly aware about it and take stock. Make mistakes, go on, and perhaps end up with the good. The good for me, Doc, would be according to each and every one of our personal experiences. We want your good to combine with mine, to combine with his, and all of that. You know, then it is a whole society approach, and thus would begin to address serious behavior change. And when next we meet, gentlemen, I want to hear your different stories from where we started. So we'll be taking it from the top, because I'm sure you will have different stories from this conversation. And it is those stories, think about the 8,000 men. That's why I asked how many men are there. Think about the 8,000 men all the time. So from here on, I can tell you, from the kitchen, the environment we created in the kitchen, and this environment, you are a step towards being the good that we're talking about. But we don't want it overnight. It is a deliberate, elaborate process that we've got to begin on. Remember I said, it's only half a song without the choreography. The talking must end at some point. But if the talking is accompanied by action, then we are doing the right thing. So thank you very much, gentlemen. I hope to see you again soon, and let's continue the conversation over the phone. Replicate these conversations in your little corners, everywhere you are. Replicate these conversations. You know, if ever you feel the need to pick up the phone and call, we are here, and that's part of holding each other accountable. And remember the language. You know, it's just that one word that then tells us that we're dealing with a much bigger problem. Thank you very much. And,
thank you. This has been a very, very good conversation. Thank you for the food.
You know, it's like, okay, we're doing the right thing.
Gentlemen, we are having, you can literally make this at home. This is a homemade ice cream. Unfortunately, it didn't set enough on the deep freezer. We call it a charcoal ice cream. We just used activated charcoal to color it black or gray, because your shirt is black. I think also it's a color that represents anti-rape, you know, GBV, but also those who go to clubs and so on who get poisoned. If you use activated charcoal, you can just dissolve it in water and drink it. It actually neutralizes the poison or the effects of the drug, whether to knock you out or whatever the purposes are. So you just need 3 ingredients to make your homemade ice cream. You need condensed milk, you need whipping cream, and you just need vanilla essence. And you just put it on the blender, food processor, and then you put it in the fridge, and it literally sets. The following day you can serve it. Quite simple. As well as the cheesecake, the ingredient is simple. For dessert, it's something that you can make at home. And you can actually make it with your kids. I love making it with my daughter because it's quite simple. Believe me, it's just 3 ingredients. You just need to whip, keep on whipping it, and that's it. It's set, and then you put it in the deep freeze, and then voila, you have yourself ice cream. Then you can just buy cones. And you share it with them, and they'll be thinking Daddy's a hero.
Can't wait to taste
the chocolate ice cream.
First time ever.
I think, gentlemen, before we tuck in, I know the ice cream is melting, so I will not take very long, but I just wanted to say thank you, gentlemen, for joining me around this round table. Special thanks to Mohale for stimulating a great conversation. Special thanks to Chef Bongani for teaching us how to cook at the beginning. I still think my liver is better than yours. But It's been a great conversation, but I think what I said at the beginning and what we've been saying throughout the conversation is that this is only a start. This will only become worth it if we carry on the conversation in our homes, in our communities, back at work, with all the men that work for us in Khumba. The more we have these conversations, the more we start thinking about actions, that's when we really start to make a difference. So I do look forward to the next conversation. And the next time when people watch this, we will be available to start engaging and having questions and an answer session. So I really look forward to that engagement. And I look forward to continued conversations. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you. Great discussion.
Thank you.